Greetings to all of you. My dear sisters and brothers and my dear friends, a warm welcome to all of you from your Pastor Yeti. And today we are in our study meditation moment of prayer. And for today it is wrestling match. The bargainer, Abraham, a man richly celebrated for his faith, heard from God in visions, in one-on-one conversations, and even in a personal visit to his tent. God dangled before him glowing promises, one of which stuck in his craw, the assurance that he would father a great nation. Abraham was 75 when he first heard that promise, and over the next few years, God upped the ante with hints of offspring as bountiful as dust on the earth and stars in the sky. Meanwhile, nature took its course, and at an age when he should be patting the heads of great grandchildren, Abraham remained childless. He knew he had few years of fertility left, if any. On one of God's visitations, Abraham made a veiled treat to produce on heir through a lesion with one of his household servants. At the age of 86, following his barren wife, Sarah's suggestion, he just did that. The next time God visited that offspring, a son named Ishmael, was a teenage outcast wandering the desert, a victim of Sarai's jealousy. Abraham laughed aloud at God's reiterated promise, and by now sarcasm was creeping into his response. Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Sarah shuddered a bitter joke, muttering, After I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure? God responded with a message that to Abraham's ears must have sounded like good news and bad news both. He would indeed father a child, but only after performing minor surgery on the part of his body necessary for the deed. Abraham thus becomes the father of circumcision as well as Isaac. That pattern of faith and trust of Abraham standing up to God only to God knocked down again forms the background for a remarkable prayer, actually an extending dialogue between God and Abraham. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? God begins as if recognizing that a valid partnership requires consultation before any major decision. And next, God unveils a plan to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, notorious for their wickedness and moral pollutions of Abraham's extended family. By now, Abraham has learned his own role in the partnership, and he makes no attempt to conceal his outrage. Far be it from you to do so a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? Then ensues a bargaining session much like what occurs in any Middle Eastern bazaar. What if there are 50 righteous persons in the city? Will you spare it? All right, if I can find 50 righteous, I'll spare the whole place. With a jolt Abraham remembers who he is bargaining with. Know that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, but proceeds to lower his request to 45 persons. 45? No problem. May the Lord not be angry, now that I have been so bold. Abraham bows and scrapes, then continues to press. 40, 30, 20, 10. Each time, God concedes without an argument, concluding, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Although 10 righteous people could not be found to save Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham got what he really wanted, deliverance for his nephew and grandnieces. And we readers are left with the tantalizing fact that Abraham quit asking before God, quit granting. What if Abraham had bargained even harder and asked that the cities be spared for the sake of one righteous person, his nephew Lot? Was God so quick to concede each point, actually looking for an advocate, a human being bold enough to express God's own deepest instinct of mercy? As Abraham learned, when we appeal to God's grace and compassion, the fearsome God soon disappears. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love and forgiving sin and rebellion. God is more merciful than we can imagine and welcome appeals to that mercy. Arguing with God. Skip forward half a millennium when another master bargainer appears on the scene. God, who has remembered his covenant with Abraham, handpicks a man with a perfect resume for a crucial assignment. Moses. Moses has spent half his life learning leadership skills from the ruling empire of the day and half his life learning wilderness survival skills while freeing a murder rap. Who better to lead a tribe of freed slaves through the wilderness to the promised land? So, as to leave no room for doubt, God introduces himself via an unnatural phenomenon. A fiery bush that does not burn up. Appropriately, Moses hides his face, afraid to look, as God announces the mission. The cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to the Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. More than enough. Unlike Abraham, Moses turns argumentative from the very first meeting. He tries false humility. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? When that fails, he marshals other objections. I don't know your name, and what if the Israelites don't believe me? I have never been eloquent. God answers each one, orchestrating a few miracles to establish credibility. Still Moses begs off. Lord, please send someone else to do it. Patience runs out and God's anger flares. But even so, God suggests a compromise, a shared role with Moses' brother Aaron. The famous exodus from Egypt thus gets underway only after an extended bargaining session. Moses plucks that knack for negotiation, that chutzpah, to a supreme test sometime later when God's patience with the tribe truly has run out. After watching 10 plagues descend on Egypt, after walking away from slavery scot-free and burdening down by plunder, after seeing a Pharaoh's state-of-the-art army swept underwater, after following a cloud by day and pillar of fire by night, after receiving miraculous supplies of water and food, some of it digesting in their bellies at that very moment, after all that, the Israelites grow afraid or bored or stiff-necked. And God's diagnosis and rejected all in favor of a golden idol made for them by Moses' sidekick brother, the very Aaron God had recruited by way of compromise. God has had quite enough. Let me alone, so that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. And I will make you into a nation stronger and more numerous than they. Moses knows well the destructive power God can unleash, for he has seen it firsthand in Egypt. Let me alone, God says. Moses hears that remark less as a command than as the sigh of a beleaguered parent who has reached the end of a tether yet somehow wants to be pulled back. In other words, an opening stance for negotiation. Moses rolls out the arguments. Look at all you went through delivering them from Egypt. What about your reputation? Think of how the Egyptians will gloat. Don't forget your promises to Abraham. Moses flings down a sack of God's own promises. For 40 days and 40 nights he lies prostrate before the Lord, refusing food and drink. At last, God yields. Go up to the land, flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. Moses proceeds to win that argument, as God reluctantly agrees to accompany the Israelites the rest of the way. And sometimes later, the table have turned. This time Moses is the one ready to resign. Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms, as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised an oath to their forefathers? And this time it is God who responds with compassion, calming Moses, sympathizing with his complaints, and designating 70 elders to share the burden. Moses did not win every argument with God. Notably, he failed to persuade God to let him enter the promised land in person, though that request too was granted many years later on the Mount of Transfiguration. But his example, like Abraham's, proves that God invites arguments and struggles, and often yields, especially when the point of contention is God's mercy. In the very process of arguing, we may in fact take on God's own qualities. Prayer is not overcoming God's reluctance. It is laying hold of his highest willingness. A strange intimacy. Were Abraham and Moses the only biblical examples of standing 2-2 with God, I would hesitate to see in their grappling encountering any kind of model for prayer. They rank, however, as two prime representatives of a style that recurs throughout the Bible. Perhaps this very trait explains why God chose them for such important tasks. The arguments of those two giants of faith seem tame compared to the rants of Job. His three friends speaks in platitude and pious formulas, using the demure language often heard in public prayers at church. They defend God through and try to suit Job's outburst and reason their way to accepting the world as it is. Job will have none of it. He bitterly objects to being the victim of a cruel God. Job speaks to God directly from the heart, a deeply wounded heart. He nearly abandons prayer because, as he tells his mortified friends, what would we gain by praying to him? Yet in the ironic twist at the end of Job, God comes down squarely on the side of Job's bare all approach, dismissing the friends, verbiage with a blast of contempt. The psalmist likewise complains of God's absence and apparent injustice. One attribute to David's captured the spirit. I am worn out, calling for help. My throat is parched. My eyes fail, looking for my God. God wrestlers. In a wrestling match, at least both parties stays engaged. That image of wrestling evokes one last scene from the Bible, the prototype of struggling with God. Abraham's grandson, Jacob, has gotten through life by trickery and deceit, and now he must face the consequences in the person of his hot-tempered brother, whom he cheated out of family birthright. Ridden by fear and guilt, Jacob sends his family and all his possessions on ahead across the river with elaborated peace offerings to mollify Esau. For 20 years he has lived in exile, while Esau greets him with a sword or an embrace. He shivers alone in the dark waiting. Someone bumps him, a man, an angel, and Jacob does not what he has always done. He fights as if his life depends on it. All night the two wrestle, neither gaining the advantage until at last the first gleam of daybreak brightens the horizon. Let me go, the figure says, reaching down what a touch so potent at wretched Jacob's hip sucked. Staggering, overpowered, scared out of his wits, Jacob still managed to hang on. I will not let you go unless you bless me, he tells the future. Instead of frenching his neck with another touch, the future tenderly bestows on Jacob a new name, Israel, which means God's wrestler. At last, Jacob learns the identity of his opponent. A little later, Jacob sees his brother Esau approaching with 400 men and limps forward to meet him. Their own wrestling match began before birth. a tussle in utero, and now the moment of truth has arrived. God still holds out his arms. Jacob felt some of each, making love and making war, with the elusive figure in the night and with hairy Esau in the day. From a distance it's hard to distinguish a strange hold from a hug. God does not give in easily, yet at the same time God seems to welcome the persistence that keeps on fighting long after the match has been decided. Perhaps Jacob learned for the first time, that long night by the riverside, how to transform struggle into love. To see your face is like seeing the face of God, Jacob told his brother, words unimaginable had he not met. God's face to face the night before. Although Jacob did many things wrong in life, he became the eponym for a tribe and a nation, as well as for all of us who wrestle with God. We are all children of Israel, implied Paul, all of us God's wrestlers, who cling to God in the dark, who chase God from room to room, who declare, I will not let you go. To us belonged the blessing, the birthright, a kingdom. The opposite of indifference, prayer is in its highest form and grandest success assumes the attitude of a wrestler with God. As the touch on Jacob's hip sock proved, God could have ended the match. At any point during that long night in the desert. Instead, the elusive figure lingered, as eager to be held as Jacob was to hold. Prayer. Prayer in its highest form and grandest success assumes the attitude of a wrestler with God. Father in heaven, Father so close everywhere we move out, you're there. We can say in heaven, we can say on earth, as it is in your will. I pray for those who are listening to come to us in our restful moment, that we consider. Help us to conquer in you, because in you we have our being and our life. In Jesus' name, amen. Blessings to all of you, my dear ones. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye.